Hello, everybody. Welcome once again to Cinemaholics. We got another bonus episode for you. We were planning to do this on the main app, but unfortunately, for reasons I'll discuss later, John Negroni was not available to see this film. But thankfully, I did see the film. I'm your usual co-host, Will Ashton, and thankfully, even more thankfully, I have a very special guest on the show. You probably know him best from our our Pet Cemetery episode, and then most recently our Malignant episode. He's from Seattle, Washington, and he is the host of the Good, the Bad, and the What podcasts. It's our friend Ryan Oliver. Welcome back, Ryan. How you doing?
I'm doing well, Will Ashton. How are you doing?
I'm not saying our full names for this one. We're just being very, very formal with this episode for some reason.
Fair enough.
No, I like it. It makes me feel like we're having a very civil, respectful conversation. I feel like, which is good because I very much like your stuff. I'm very excited to have you back on the show. I feel like it's been too long, but you were on, fittingly, as I mentioned, our Malignant episode, which is a pretty fitting comparison point for this film, as many reviews have already pointed out.
Yeah, I think that seems to be my bread and butter is September released horror movies that have twists and turns that the marketing hid, but you should go in cold anyway to them. So there's definitely a lot of overlap between this movie and Malignant. So I'm happy to be back on mic, and I'm honored to be here.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about that since you brought it up. Yeah, what was your kind of awareness of the film going into it? Because I was pretty in the dark, I think, for the better about this film, but I was curious, did you have any expectations? Were you was this on your radar? What was your relationship going into the film?
It wasn't particularly, I guess I should rewind there. I knew about it, and mainly because of a friend in distro who I don't know what they can disclose and what not to, so I'll keep them anonymous for now, but they told me, you should definitely keep Barbarian on your radar when it comes out. So I was like, okay, cool. I'm gonna do that. I did see one trailer for the movie, which I guess we'll preface for people. The trailer really only discloses anything in the first act of the movie. It really doesn't show a whole lot. But I think when I saw Bodies, 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 I saw this trailer. And then I knew that it was directed by Zach Cregger, who most famously is on the sketch comedy show The Whitest Kids You Know. And he had directed one other feature before, 2009's Miss March, which I have not seen, admittedly, but I have heard it's pretty infamously bad. And so hearing these rumblings about Barbarian and hearing how good it was and hearing how you should go in as cold as possible, I was like, okay, I'm going to go see it. And I'm going to try and go see it as soon as it comes out, because I'm sure it's going to get spoiled left and right. So I made it a clear effort to go see it on opening day.
Nice. Yeah, I didn't have any word of mouth going into this like you did, but it was one that admittedly I did kind of keep my radar as well, only because Searchlight, as we know, has been pretty much putting all their new releases onto Hulu, or at least Disney is kind of putting all their Searchlight movies onto Hulu. This is even going to Prey, which should be, in theaters. It's a blockbuster. It's getting great reviews. I still need to see it. But, Fresh also went to Hulu. No Exit went to Hulu. A lot of these films.
The Princess was another one. Oh,
yeah, that's right. Yeah. But especially a lot of their horror films have been going to streaming exclusively. But this one got a theatrical exclusive. And I was very curious about that. I was like, okay, something's up with this. It could just be a contract thing. But it gave me some hope that, clearly there is some hope that this was going to get an audience, that people involved with the production were excited about it. And like you said, yeah, it's Zach Cregger. He's writing and directing it. Some people call it his debut, but yeah, I guess it's technically his solo debut. As you were mentioning, he had previously co-wrote, co-starred, and co-directed Miss March with the late Trevor Moore, who unfortunately passed away last year. One half of his team from Whitest Kids You Know. But yeah, I mean, that was where I kind of got a little nervous because, I am a fan of Several Wise Kids You Know sketch. I wasn't like as in tune with it as like Key and Peele. It wasn't quite as big for me as like when Jordan Peele directed Get Out. It was like, yeah, like I like Zach Cregger. I thought that movie was a disappointment, but it is kind of a weird sort of thing, like kind of similar to Jordan Peele. He had like Keanu, which he didn't direct, but that was another kind of film where it's like he's starring in it. It wasn't a box office hit. It wasn't quite as critically savaged as Miss March, but it was another one where it's like, well, I don't know, maybe movies aren't quite the direction. Then they come out and prove themselves as a horror director, which is this trend that I'm really loving now with the two of them. And obviously Jordan Peele is a big inspiration for this film. But is there any other sketch comedians that you would like to tip their hat and maybe like propose they should get into horror directing? I have a couple names, but I want to hear from you first.
Well, I feel like I got to roll out the red carpet for you because I saw your Letterboxd review and it made me like snort laugh out loud
Yes,
that you're looking forward to what the sick and twisted mind of Frank Caliendo comes up with. So I thought that was really funny. As far as me personally, I don't know. Like I don't really have any off the top of my head. Mainly because I didn't. When Jordan Peele first came out with Get Out, I was like, oh, well, that's just like an anomaly. And I remember even like, I think there was like an interview like with him and with like Jason Blum at the time. And I remember because Blumhouse famously doesn't really bankroll first time directors, or at least at the time they didn't. Maybe that's changed. But I remember him saying something to the effect of like, oh, well, he had so much experience with Key and Peele that, we gave him that opportunity. And so I was just like, oh, that's sort of like just a freak like thing that happened. But now seeing the Zach Cregger making Barbarian and him coming from a sketch background, I was like, oh, okay, maybe this is a thing. So that could happen. But yeah, I don't have any off the top of my head. I don't know if has Dave Foley done anything from Kids in the Hall? Like
certainly not.
I feel like maybe he's directed, but I could be wrong.
Yeah, I was gonna say I think he has maybe directed, but certainly not in horror genres, so far as I can recall. Maybe we'll put a little disclaimer if that's me misspeaking. But I was gonna say the name that floats into my mind at the moment is Bill Hader, just primarily based on the success of Barry, and particularly coming off this last season, which kind of almost dived into some horror. I don't want to spoil anything if you haven't watched or caught up with Barry yet, but I feel like that's
I have.
Okay, I was gonna say, because there's some stuff in like, especially towards the end of season 3, where I feel like if this guy directs a film, especially a horror film, he's really gonna make something I think pretty haunting, compelling. But yeah, I mean, I certainly, similar to you, was kind of the opinion that like Jordan Peele is an anomaly, and to be fair, like, this movie isn't quite Get Out. Like I don't want to oversell it from the get-go. Like it's not quite as political. It's not quite as precedent. I think it's doing something that is, I think, to my surprise, a little bit more kind of exploitation heavy. It's something that I'm really, really surprised that Disney distributed this film without giving too much away. Yeah.
Sorry, I didn't mean to step over.
No. I was just going to say, but I do think there's a lot going on under the surface here. Like I'm trying to not oversell it or undersell it. Like I think there's a lot of really compelling commentary here, especially related to its setting in Detroit, even though it was filmed primarily in Bulgaria. But yeah, I think it's one of those films where a lot of what surprises me is how it subverts expectations, but also how it is kind of making itself comparable to Jordan Peele, and not just in terms of being from another sketch comedian, but using the way that we approach comedy and horror kind of in conjunction with one another, kind of playing with expectations, but also going against expectations, and kind of playing with story structure and formula, but also giving us exactly what we want as far as like a horror movie crowd pleasing experience. I just think his ability to kind of do that from what, only his second film really is incredibly impressive. And that's where I think the Peele comparisons are really going to be warranted.
For sure. Because I think, and you kind of mentioned, it's maybe not as like sort of politically and socially astute or maybe as direct as Get Out, but it's certainly, there's a lot there. There's a lot bubbling underneath the surface. And I think it's funny as well, because the one movie I thought of a lot actually while watching this movie, in addition to some of the other like recently set Detroit movies, horror movies like It Follows and Don't Breathe, I thought a lot about Us, Jordan Peele's second movie, like the way that movie is really evocative in its imagery, but I feel like the Us is a movie I like, but the more it sort of peels back its layers and reveals its hand, the less effective I felt like it became by the third act of the movie. Versus Barbarian, I feel like this movie is like a Russian nesting doll almost of the way it's structured, but the more it peels back its layers, the more interesting the movie got. And it's certainly it's definitely exploitation. It's definitely nasty. And it definitely sort of subverts that notion of like, and I know filmmaker has coined this phrase. It was definitely a PR term. I'm sure, I know you've talked about it on the show before, and I think I've talked about it when I've been on the show, that the elevated horror genre, so to speak, that like classier, them trying to make it classy for people who don't like horror, but like it's all kind of horror, so it doesn't really matter. And I feel like this sort of subverts that notion of like, this movie is about a lot, and it's about a lot of contemporary stuff, and it's certainly there, but I feel like this movie delivers requisite nasty genre thrills, like, and remembers to work as like a horror movie first, and then everything else comes sort of secondary. But it really works, and I'm with you. I don't want to oversell it for people, because I think it is a genuine surprise of a movie, and I think that you should go in cold, like not only with like what happens in the movie, but you should go in as cold as possible with like what people are saying about the movie. Like go check it out is what I would say for sure.
Yeah, because I mean, there's a part of me that is a little concerned. Like, I think the Malignant comparisons are warranted, but I don't think it's quite as like overtly crazy as that film. Like, there's definitely insane things that happen in this film, but I feel like it's not quite that experience. Like, I'm already starting to see some reactions from people being like, yeah, I mean, that's like wild and out there, and I like the film, but it's not like this. And I'm like, yeah, like that's fair, because I think, like that early opening weekend reaction can very easily kind of tip its hat into like, this is like another like absurd gonzo movie. And while it is definitely kooky and does some weird things, I don't think it's quite going for that direction. But it's like another one of those things where I'm excited to talk about it a little bit more and dive into it deeper, because the stuff that I really love about the film is both like what it does against my expectations, but also the stuff that plays into my expectations, but when I least expect it, I guess, if that makes sense.
Totally.
So yeah, I mean, it sounds like at least you, I know, seem like you're a pretty big fan. I'm already kind of suggesting as much as well, but before we really get into our actual kind of more in-depth thoughts, I will give a brief synopsis. I'll try to be, as coy with the details as possible, but basically the general premise of the film, as we see from the first like 20 minutes or so, as you mentioned in the trailer, is that there's this young woman who's coming to Detroit for a job interview. Her name is Tess Marshall. She's played by Georgina Campbell, and she's staying at this Airbnb, and a lot of things are going wrong. It's raining. The key isn't quite working. She's got the wrong code. She's trying to call the people. They're not responding. And she finds herself interacting with this kind of bizarre younger man named Keith, who's played by Bill Skarsgård, who's also a producer on the film. They have a sort of like what would otherwise be a kind of meet cute situation, like in a more like kind of lighthearted version of this film. They have like kind of a situation where they're both staying at this Airbnb when they should be staying there separately or at different times, but they both were able to book the Airbnb at the same time. They try to find a hotel. There's some sort of convention or something happening per his estimation, so she can't find a hotel. But, they start to get along with each other, but there is like this air of like, is he really who he says he is? Is there some sort of like warranted mistrust going on? And, as the day goes along, or the following day goes along, Tess finds herself in the basement kind of exploring, and she finds this like hidden crevice in the house, and there's like some kind of weird stuff going on there. She finds something pretty horrifying, and she wants to kind of run away, but there are a lot of complicating factors, and a lot of things sort of happen from there that cause a real whirlwind of a time in Detroit for this poor Tess Marshall. And so that's like a very, very broad general breakdown of the plot. Obviously, there's a lot of things that are going on. It's better just not know that stuff going into the film. But yeah, so we already kind of generally talked about the film, but I want to hear from you a little bit more in depth, Brian. What is about this film that I think, from what I'm gathering from you, makes this one of the better horror films, or at least one of the better studio horror films that you've seen so far this year?
I think what makes it one of the better studio horror films this year is that it is genuinely. I think it's genuinely creepy. It is about a lot. The way the movie and I already sort of mentioned this earlier in the episode, where like the way it's structured and it continuously surprises you with the way it's structured. And to go back maybe a little bit to talking about like comedians getting into horror. I mean, constructing a joke to getting to a punchline is not really dissimilar to constructing a scare and constructing a scene to build upon it to get to the inevitable like release of the scene. And so I think the movie is genuinely surprising. I think the performances are terrific, which we didn't even really like talk about. I think that we'll probably have to get more into spoilers here, but I think the way the movie subverts how we perceive some of these actors from some of the other movies they've been in, I feel like plays into a lot of the factors. I think Bill Skarsgård being one of them, and another actor who comes in the movie later, which we'll get into. I think they do a really good job of sort of subverting the expectations of what those performers and what you've seen. And it's just like old school gnarly genre filmmaking too. Like I'm trying to think, like, because I have a hard time, like, I'm kind of even blanking of like some of the other studio or like mini major horror movies that even came out this year. They have just not like stuck in my brain like very much. I mean, I guess Alex Garland's Men would be one of them. Which is like this is like the polar opposite for me, because Men did not work for me, even though I usually love Alex Garland's work, because that one's so like thuddingly like ham-fisted in the one thing that it's about, versus Barbarian is about a lot, but it's also a very streamlined, pretty like twisty thrill ride, and it functions on a primal level, and then it works on a like different level as well. So yeah, I bet I'd be interested to hear some of your more in-depth, spoilery thoughts. I feel like I've gone on too long.
No, not at all. I mean, I think we're pretty much on the same page, because similar to you, I feel like I've been pretty underwhelmed by a lot of major horror movies this year. I mean, I feel like Bodies, as you mentioned, was one that also left me a little underwhelmed. John and I have kind of disputed this, but I feel like that was another film, as you mentioned, similar to Men, which I feel like I already tweeted this, but this is like the Chad to Men's The Virgin. I just feel like this
the
movie,
Virgin Men.
Yeah, exactly.
Barbarian.
Yeah. I feel like, because like they're both tackling like gender expectations and like the role that women can play in horror films, and like this, the sort of patriarchal society and the horrors they're in. Obviously, it's like stuff that we've seen a lot before, and I think this movie is a lot more self-aware about that in a way that Men feels weirdly sort of like unself-aware, given how talented and smart I find Alex Garland to be. And like you said, like I think his other stuff that he's done, both as a writer and director, I think has been pretty tremendous through and through. And I don't really know what happened with that one. It just felt like a parody of a kind of A24 film. And likewise, I found myself in a similar position with Bodies. While that movie is trying to go for satire, I felt like a lot of the comedy was just kind of obvious. It was just a lot of like, it felt very broad. It felt very weirdly kind of toothless. It didn't feel like it took any risk, but it felt like it was taking a lot of risk. And I saw a tweet about Bodies recently that really, I feel like, surmised my thoughts of the movie, where it's like they thought they could do a feature-length version of the Beach House episode from the HBO show Girls, but without the preceding 2.5 seasons to lead up to that moment. I was like, yeah, that's pretty valid, because I sorry to interrupt you, but I'm on a similar wavelength with Bodies, where I found that to be pretty underwhelming as well. I would 100% agree with that estimation, because that was the exact thought that went through my head, because it was like, this reminds me a lot of the Beach House episode of Girls, but just not nearly as smart or not nearly as funny or not even nearly as cutting as that episode is. Like, that's just so much better, and that doesn't even have any blood or gore or anything in it, but I feel like it's way more ruthless all the same. But yeah, I mean, even like Black Phone, which is a film that I think is maybe a little bit better than those two, but I also found myself a little underwhelmed by that film. I think more so because that film, I think, did have some interesting ideas. I just don't think it quite came together in a truly compelling way for me outside of Ethan Hawke's performance, which I wish there was a little bit more of in that film. But yeah, just I was seeing all these.
Same.
Yeah, there's a lot of horror movies I've been seeing this year where I'm just like, man, like I obviously love horror, but I'm just like not really like getting my fix. And I'm like, is this more of a me thing? Because I'm seeing a lot of these like great reviews for those films, not so much with Men, but at least with Bodies, Bodies, and The Black Phone. I'm like, maybe it's just a me thing. Maybe I'm just not really connecting with this genre anymore. Maybe I'm expecting too much. And then this film comes along, and it felt like a breath of fresh air. I was like, okay, there is still good in this genre. I still can connect with it. It's just that these other films just weren't really doing it, at least for me. And I felt like,
agreed.
Yeah. And it is, I think, because like Zachary Cregger seems like a lot more aware of like the expectations of the genre. He is willing to kind of play and twist with them, but he is like, he's not like trying to like act above it. Like he's not trying to act like, oh, it needs to be something more highbrow. It needs to be something a little bit more like intellectually probing, or we need to kind of like be like wink, wink, nudge, nudge about everything. I really like this movie has like kind of like a Wes Craven approach to the things where it is knowledgeable, it's smart, it's competent about these things, but it is playing into them. It's not like trying to act like it's above them or beneath them. It's just like kind of like, well, like, you know, I can see that Zachary Cregger has watched a lot of horror movies and he's like seen a lot of these tropes before, and it's just like like you can tell when he's writing, it's like, yeah, like I know where it's gonna go, like that's kind of boring me as I'm writing. What if I just did this? And it's like, oh shit. It's like, okay, like, well, this happened, so like what do we do with this? And it's like a lot more compelling to me to see that. And it feels like you said, like when you see comedians kind of go into the horror genre, it seems like they're obviously very pop culture savvy. They know a lot about these tropes and stuff. And similar to their approach to comedy, where it's like kind of like poking fun and subverting expectations, they're kind of playing with timing and approach and character, but you know, not acting like it's like something that's above them or like trying to be snotty about it. And I think that's really commendable for, especially for a horror debut, but for a film of this scope and scale to like kind of find that balance. And you know, I see a lot of people criticize like horror comedies. I think it's because they tend to kind of like flip flop in tone throughout. Like they'll be like, here's a serious scene and like here's a funny one, and like it kind of undercuts some tension. I feel like what I find really commendable is what you're mentioning, where it's like this movie can be really funny but doesn't undersell the horror of it. Like it can be creepy and filled with tension, but there will just be moments throughout that are kind of funny and are unexpected in a humorous way, but I'm still kind of creeped out and weirded out at the same time. And I think that's what I really love about horror comedies in that respect. Like they can kind of provoke both reactions and realize that they're in conjunction with one another, not just like here's a horror scene, here's a funny scene. They can kind of be marinate together, and that's something that's obviously not easy to do. And the fact that Cregger can pull it off here is again very commendable, I think, to his talents as a developing genre filmmaker.
For sure. I think that is the fallacy of a lot of horror comedies. Like even if they are like funny, is they tend to put the greater emphasis on the comedy. And so therefore it like undermines the scares, versus this is, you know, I mean, this would be very hyperbolic, but like, you know, I think my favorite horror comedy of all time would be like Evil Dead 2, where it's like it is the comedy and the horror are like perfectly in lockstep with one another, and they're giving an equal measure. And I mean, this movie's not that, but it's trying to do that, and it's closer to that than a lot of them land. And I'm glad you brought up the Wes Craven comparison, because that's definitely The People Under the Stairs was a movie I thought of a lot while watching this movie, because that movie also is very it's very like, you know, I mean, and that movie's very blunt in its sort of like societal and political aspirations, and this movie's not quite as blunt as that, but they're certainly there. And so I thought of that movie a lot. And then I guess lastly, to talk about horror movies of the year, because I wouldn't even say these are horror movies, but the two horror adjacent ones, or at least people who are known for horror movies we got this year, were not like straightforward horror movies like The Northman from Robert Eggers, or Nope even from Jordan Peele, which is maybe some of the most horrific imagery I've seen in a movie this year. But would I call it a straightforward horror movie? Probably not. It's more of a sort of sci-fi summer blockbuster. But yeah, I'm sort of in the same boat as you, where like a lot of the movies, you mentioned The Black Phone, you mentioned Bodies, 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 that I was sort of like, like kind of underwhelmed with some of these movies. You know, maybe Gaspar Noé's Lux Aeterna, if you want to call that a horror movie, wasn't one I really liked as well. But yeah, this was, once I left this movie, I was like, yes, this feels right. We're dipping into fall. Like this feels like the horror movie that I've been waiting for all year. And it's it delivers.
Yeah, absolutely. And I will echo your sentiments about The Northman and Nope. Still two of my favorite movies of the year. But I guess the reason I didn't bring them up before is because I feel like they're not solely horror. Certainly, like The Northman is having kind of a more like, Nordic epic. And then Nope is dipping its toes in the Western, sci-fi, and all that. So I let it, stick in multiple genres. And obviously this is playing with genres too, but I see it through and through as a horror film. And I feel like the other movies I've seen that are most aligned with horror have been kind of underwhelming with me. And so seeing a film like this for sure has been just such a relief, and makes me it just makes me feel inspired. Like, okay, like we can do stuff on a scale like this that is weird, but also like smart about it, and, cunning in how it plays with these expectations, but not just like being too cutesy about it, not trying to do like a Max Landis thing in a way that I bring up his name for a reason, and we'll discuss why in spoilers. But yeah. So I feel like that's a pretty good segue to kind of go into spoilers. But if you have any more non-spoilery thoughts, general thoughts about the film, I don't want to cut you off at this time.
No, really all I would say is if you made it this far in the episode and you have not seen the movie, please shut this episode off and go watch it and then come back and listen to it, because it is, you should, again, go in cold. Don't know much about this movie going into it.
Yeah, definitely if you can help it, go in cold. And I mean, obviously it's still playing in theaters by the time you're listening to this. Please see it in theaters. I mean, I don't know how it's doing box office wise, if you've been keeping track with the early box office estimates.
Topped the box office this last weekend with 10 million, by just sheer virtue of it probably being the only wide release that came out.
Right.
There's a couple coming out, when you're listening to this episode, like The Woman King and Pearl, and see how they run. But hopefully, and I mean, I know Pearl is going to give it some direct competition because that's also a straightforward horror movie. Which, speaking of which, X, I loved X. I forgot that X came out this year.
Oh yeah.
So there's another great horror movie from this year.
Yeah.
So sorry, I didn't mean to step.
No.
I know we're trying to move away from non-spoilers, but
yeah,
it unlocked in my brain. I was like, oh yeah, X came out this year.
Anyway, let's do a kind of, I don't know, I don't remember exactly how we dive into spoilers on Cinemaholics, but I'll just say, be warned now, spoilers, here they come. Now we're here in the spoiler talk. So where do you want to really start with this horror conversation? Because there's a lot of avenues we can really go down, but I guess we just kind of, you want to start with the Justin Long aspect of it, like his whole AJ character?
I think we probably should, because I do want to. It's tough though, because it's like I do almost want to start from the beginning, not from like the beat by beat, but from how the movie sort of automatically subverts your expectations going in, such as like when, to elaborate more on our non-spoiler thoughts of like, here's the situation, they're at the same Airbnb, and they're consistently framing the movie. They're consistently framing Bill Skarsgård's character to be like off and creepy, and like, I think you already put, is this guy really like off, or does he seem like a nice guy? And I feel like they're playing into that notion of like, okay, because you've seen him play Pennywise, and you've seen him play, he was in that movie Villains, so it's like you've seen him as this type of character before, and I love that the movie sort of breaks down that like notion of like, I feel like one of the big themes of this movie that really works for me is sort of like trying to break down like biases, like the biases that we have for like the people in our lives. Like they're clearly like, there's a bias against Bill Skarsgård's character because it comes across as creepy. There's a bias against a homeless person who Tess thinks is trying to attack her, after like the first act of the movie, but then it really comes back into play to being like a hero of sorts in this movie. Justin Long's character, and I don't want to get too far in the weeds, empathizes, like it enforces his sort of smarmy, ugly worldview that he like sees what ostensibly is our killer, and like empathizes with him almost immediately with no context. Like I really like that, like as part of this movie. But I think like, if you have no other elaboration on that, like you said, maybe we should get into Justin Long's character, because I feel like that's really where the movie starts its first run pull, I would say.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I mean, I don't want to cut you off if you had anything, because I think all you say is very true, and I think key to why this movie is such a kind of refreshing change of things. But yeah, I guess I brought up Justin Long first just because for me, like that was one of those things where I had no idea he was in this film, like going into it, and we have like this moment, obviously, like where you get the traditional setup, and then you get that moment where like you expect some sort of like someone in the shadows coming out. Obviously, like earlier in the movie, we saw a door close. We know that they're not alone in this house. There's someone else there. But then we get, what we kind of traditionally expect, like this sort of like Hills Have Eyes sort of weird mutation sort of thing. But we expect like that was maybe something that Bill Skarsgård's character is like used, like lured her into this thing to kind of like kidnap her and trap her. But then no, his head just gets smashed right into the wall. Very gory, violent death. And, we have this kind of like big cliffhanger moment that happens. And then suddenly we're in sunny Malibu and we're with Justin Long, who's doing like, karaoke session in his car. And then we're getting this kind of like in real time Me Too situation that's going on with him. And like you said, yeah, it's just like that was one of those big like what's going on, like what, like in a delightful sort of way, like it's like what's going on, like where are we taking this? And then we obviously learn that like so Cregger's kind of taking this format of like, here's like a woman who's kind of like expecting the worst to sort of happen, but like she's obviously knowledgeable about everything, but she has like an innate sort of like goodness in her, which I think is very kind of compelling for a horror movie. It's like, it's not that she's like dumb, like she's not like unaware of what can happen. She's very clearly knowledgeable. Like there's like kind of similar like Nope situation where like she sees something very bad and she like is like, nope, I'm not going to do that. Or like she's going to like think twice before she does something. But she does want to do the right thing, and she doesn't want like other people to get hurt or anything like that. And I think that's a very compelling angle for a horror protagonist. And then we have a character like Justin Long, who, clearly is not a great guy, but we can kind of early on, you kind of like, well, maybe like we don't know the whole story with him. Like we're seeing it from his perspective. Maybe something's going on, but we clearly, as the movie goes along, it's like, yeah, no, clearly he's just a huge douchebag. Clearly he's just a dumb idiot. Yeah. Like clearly he's a terrible person. But yeah, like there is this weird kind of parallel that happens later on where we see this guy, like a true like outright monster guy from Detroit, who's stalking and kidnapping and raping women. And yeah, you have that moment later on where they're kind of like like they're seeing each other, they're mirrors of themselves, but one's like in denial about it and one is just like just doesn't really care. Like he's just like completely without any sort of innate empathy or sympathy for another person. And yeah, like he sees a video and that's like that kind of revelation moment where Justin Long's character AJ is kind of like looking in at himself, but he doesn't realize that. Yeah, and it's just like such a like compelling thing. And then obviously that's not getting to like kind of like the social political commentary, but just yeah, I mean, what starts off is just like you said, like this sort of Russian nesting doll thing where it starts off as simply kind of like what you expect, like this sort of men adjacent horror movie becomes like this kind of like seedy look at like the underbelly of men and just like the way people look at other people and what we expect from other people. And it just becomes like, really thoughtful and really intriguing without losing the entertainment factor in the process. And yeah, I really like that about this film.
Yeah, I did as well. And I think that it's a total, when we're introduced like that sunny Malibu scene, it's a complete and like utter gear shift because it's like one of the most overtly comedic scenes of the movie. And I guess one thing we didn't even mention as well, the aspect ratio changes through the movie as well. Like it starts in scope. And then when we get to the Justin Long sequence, it goes more to the flat look, which is funny because I mean most comedies are projected in that format, so that's actually like really interesting. And then it goes into a further, and I forget which exact aspect ratio is, but like when we go back into like the 1980s with the like to learn more about the serial rapist character, it's like even more 4:3 aspect ratio. So I love that change. And I love that that there's like I love that the movie at least tries to give you sort of like glimmers into sort of like empathizing with like a character like Justin Long's, because it's like he's such a rampant douchebag, as you said, but like the movie every once in a while it feels like it's going to try and give you like either a redemption for him or like the character's realizing like I like he has that realization where he even says directly like am I a bad person, or did I just do a bad thing, or can I like save that thing? And you're like, oh no, is the movie going to like try and redeem him? And then it like ends like really, really horribly for him. And so I found all that fascinating. And just the like, I sunk in my seat from cringe of like, because he's getting, he's Me Too'd, so like he can't get work. Nobody wants to work with him. His agent is dropping him. His financier is dropping him, and so he's going back to Detroit to sell his properties. We find out he is the owner of this Airbnb. He just does the property management, and he discovers the basement. So like it's a complete 180 from like Tess discovering it, because it's all eerie and it's like creepy and it's terrifying. He discovers it and he immediately calls his property manager and is like, he's like, can a basement add square footage to the housing plan? And they're like, no, not necessarily, but you can add it in a listing. And he's just like, fuck yeah, and like taking the tape measure all through the basement. And I was just like, I was laughing, but I was just also like slinking in my seat of like, oh my God, this is so embarrassing for this guy.
Yeah, I mean, like obviously, like Tess sees it as like this horrible, like descent into hell sort of situation. He just sees it as like his like kind of personal heaven in a weird way. Like he can get all this extra money. He's just kind of like oblivious to any sort of like crud and decrepitness of it outside of the bed, of course. But he doesn't seem to mind like the bucket or the camera or anything. He just kind of lets it all lay by. And no warning signs are going off in his head. He's just like, kind of living his own little financial fantasy or whatever is going on right now. But I mean, I was very curious to hear from you as far as like, so the movie doesn't really address it outright, but there is like some kind of blunt criticism about like some political things like Reaganomics and like Reagan's America, like the idea that like this decay and moral collapse is kind of happening under like after the boom of the 80s, and like the idea that like there's this sort of financial ruin that like is kind of causing like these spawns and like this like horrible decrepit non-gentrified houses and all this stuff. And obviously we have like the police are coming and just like not doing anything at all. And I was very curious, like when I watched the movie, I felt like this was all kind of like pointed and like, sneering. But I was listening to an interview from Zach Cregger earlier today, and he was saying that like this stuff wasn't really like he like was aware of it, but wasn't something he was like trying to like make a direct sort of pointed commentary. And I feel like that's so sort of just stark when I see a lot of movies now where it's like they almost kind of pat themselves on the back for including these sort of things. And I felt like with this movie, it's just kind of organic to like the story that he was telling. Like he's like tackling all these things, he's getting ambitious with it, and they just kind of add to it. I feel like it's more thematically compelling to me because he's willing to just kind of let these things be in the film without like trying to make them like something a lot thornier and a lot more like poking and sneering. Like it's just more like he just wants to like add to like the themes that he's already tackling here. And like obviously there's a lot of thorny stuff that's in there already, but it's just like, well, it's because of all these different things that are going on. And I don't know, I just felt like to me that approach was more refreshing for a film like this. It felt more true to like an exploitation film, like where it is not afraid to kind of like do these sort of gross and weird things in the service of having some political commentary, but not letting the commentary override the entertainment value of the film. And I think that's what really impresses me about the film. But I wanted to hear a little bit more about you. Do you think I'm kind of like underselling some of his intent as far as like the politics of it? Or do you think that that's kind of what he's going for as far as the approach?
Well, I think that, and maybe I mentioned this at the top in the non-spoiler section, but we can elaborate on more of it here, is that I don't think you're underselling it. I think it's definitely there, but I think I appreciate his approach as opposed to a lot of filmmakers, because I feel like, to go back to like the Men example, right? Where like that movie's 100% trying to put its sort of message and its theme first and forgets to actually be a convincing or compelling like narrative. Because it's really not that compelling of a movie as a narrative, versus what Zach Cregger is doing with Barbarian is like he's trying to tell a twisty, nasty horror movie story, and he's putting the story first. And because we are sitting with these characters and they're all well drawn out, they're all well fleshed out, that we're invested in the story first. And I think that and maybe it's hard to say whether, these things like kind of just happen by accident. And I certainly think there's certain things in the story that, are purposeful in that sort of like commentary, such as like the crumbling, like the Reaganomics trickle down, like you said, as we get to that flashback of the, in the 80s where like the neighbor of the serial killer is like, I'm moving. I got, we don't think we're going to be able to do it by this time next year, meaning that they think the housing bubble is going to collapse. And so they're like, okay, well, we're going to get out. And, juxtapose, when we see that shot, it's like everything's all sort of like almost Leave It to Beaver-esque versus like now where it's like that one house is still nice and everything else is like completely like in shambles. And so I like, and like you said, the stuff with like the police, that's like, that was an interesting like factor of the movie of like, Tess calls the police when she thinks that homeless person is attacking her, and then calls the police like when she's lost her phone. She's just been happy to get out of the house alive, and they mistake her. They think she's a crackhead. They think she's like a crazy person, and they don't do anything. It was just like a complete a cab cops are useless sort of element. And I think that I definitely think that he didn't achieve those by accident, but I don't think that was his primary focus. But because it wasn't his primary focus, it makes the movie much better, to be honest. I think that those elements land because we are so invested on the journey of these characters, and they are astute observations in a world that we know and we understand. But it's not hammering your head over about it. I think if you weren't looking for those elements, or if you just aren't, that's not how you watch movies, this movie would still work as a squeamish, like, what the hell sort of descent into hell for people. But it works as that, and then there's all these other elements here that make the movie, I think, much richer. And like you said, reminiscent of an exploitation movie, which some of the best, we bring up Wes Craven again, like Hills Have Eyes, like one of the greatest like exploitation movies ever. And even like, I don't love Last House on the Left, but like even that movie is like very like has its societal commentary about the Vietnam War and how you would see like watch sitcoms in between horrible footage of people being maimed and murdered during the Vietnam War on the news, and sort of like that's what he was playing with, but the movie was sort of like revenge movie narrative first, and I think that's the approach that he takes with this movie.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you fittingly hit the nail on the head there as far as like I think you said it perfectly. It's like it's not the primary focus. Like, obviously, like I think these thoughts are lingering in his head, like he's thinking about them like intuitively, maybe more so than like deliberately, but like they're things that add to the film, but they're not like in Men where it's like, hey, Adam and Eve, get it. Like we're gonna pause the movie for 2 minutes to make sure you get it. It's just like stuff like that where, I feel like a movie, like when I watch Men, I'm like, all right, like I'm halfway into this and I already feel like I know everything this movie is trying to say. Like, where are we going with this in a sense of like, what else is there to do? Like, why are we doing this for another hour? Whereas with this movie, it's just like, like you said, like that Russian nesting doll thing where it's just like, it keeps going. It's like, oh, we're going to talk about this and we're going to tackle this and we're going to do this. And maybe it's not tackling them with like, like the fullest intent. Like it's not always like digging into the meat on the bone, but it's at least like showing that it wants to do more and more things while not like kind of overindulging itself or like overdoing it to the point where it's like kind of losing focus. Everything plays into like the themes that clearly are played out here from the beginning. And yeah, I think that's just something that really just demonstrates like Cregger's thoroughness and his boldness as a filmmaker. And it was going along. Like there's some moments like you mentioned, like midway through where I was kind of getting a little worried or I was starting to squirm. Like maybe this is going to kind of start to fall apart and all this stuff. But I think by the third act, it really just kind of bloomed into exactly the sort of movie that I was hoping this would be. And yeah, certainly by that last scene, I found myself really satisfied with the direction it went and the directions it went, I should say.
Me too. No, I 100%. And I know I already mentioned it sort of tangentially about its Detroit setting, but I think And I like this movie even better than the one I'm going to say. But I think like, and I know *Malignant* was a comparison to people because like, oh my god, it takes bonkers twists. But *Malignant* is kind of bonkers from the word go, and I feel like the comparison is almost a little bit like kind of does a disservice to both movies. But I think *Don't Breathe* was really the movie that this reminded me of most. Of like, it's sort of here's this. Initially starts as this one movie on the surface, like, you know, this one being a sort of like chamber piece, and actually really Don't Breathe as well. That one's just more home invasion. And then that one also in a basement peels back horrible layers about a horrible, horrible man who's done despicable things to women. And I feel like that movie is probably a greater comparison piece, except this movie is much more... There's much more layers to this movie, and it's also much more sort of humorous versus Don't Breathe. As much as I liked it, is definitely not a humorous movie. I don't think there's a funny bone in that movie's body.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, the only thing I'll add to that is just that and it was a movie I initially thought of, but when he pointed out, this comparison made a lot of sense to me. I guess Audition, Takashi Miike's film, was a big inspiration for this film. And it was one of those things, like, it wasn't in my mind when I was watching the film, but afterwards when he mentioned it, I was like, actually, that makes a good bit of sense. Like, I can see why that was like a point of comparison. And obviously, like we kind of alluded to, like Evil Dead 2, we said was a big comparison. Obviously, I think Sam Raimi's sort of the master of, you know, combining the laugh and the scare and doing it in conjunction with one another. And yeah, I mean, I don't think I don't want to like say he's on that level yet, but I think he's taking the right lessons from these filmmakers. And that's always what excites me, is like when a filmmaker can incorporate these styles from different filmmakers and not just make them a passe, but rather just use them in the service of the stories that they want to tell, and make something that, you know, only someone like Zach Cregger can kind of come up with something like this weird and this unique and this defiant of genre tropes, but also, you know, making a traditionally satisfying, you know, horror comedy that you can watch with the crowd and kind of revel in, everyone kind of, you know, losing their mind in any individual moments. Yeah. All bottled up into something just perversely satisfying. So, yeah, I mean, that's pretty much the full extent of what I have to say. I mean, is there any kind of major thoughts that you wanted to say just as a final sort of wrap up for the film?
I don't think any major thoughts other than I'm very excited to see what he does next. You know, I mean, this was definitely, I think like a lot of these horror movies, it was made kind of on the cheap. I think it was a $5 million budget, which is the same budget Get Out was made on. And so I'm really impressed what he's able to do. And I really excited to see what's next. Hopefully, you know, someone gives him a little bit more cash to do something, but he's seemingly very resourceful and yeah, I think it's a really impressive, well, I guess like we said, not debut film, but a sort of, I guess not a debut, but a re-entry or I don't know what you want to call it, but I mean, I know Miss March was like 13 years ago, so it's vastly different. So
a reawakening of some sort, a creative reawakening. Yeah.
There you go. Yeah, I think that's a good way to put it.
Yeah.
So look forward to what's coming next from him, for sure. And I'm just happy it played theaters, like you said. I'm hoping we see. Hoping this is a trend we see more of. You know, you pointed out that a lot of 20th Century and Searchlight movies are going directly to Hulu. This one got a theatrical release. I think of the day we're recording this, just found out that Paramount movie Smile that comes out at the end of September was also meant to be a Paramount Plus streaming movie, but the test screenings were so good and so high that they're like, we'll put it in theaters. So I'm hoping this is a more upward trend for sure.
Yeah, I saw that news, and I was really surprised about that one, only because I keep seeing the trailers for that, and I'm like, this just looks so goofy. Like, goofy in a bad way. I love goofy movies, but like this one's like, there's no way they can make this work for like 90 minutes. But I'm hoping, based on that response, you know, that they make something that is maybe not on this level, but at least something that is worthy of the theatrical experience. Are you looking forward to Smile?
I wasn't until I heard that information. I'm kind of in the same boat because I saw that little brief teaser, I think, in front of Crimes of the Future, and it reminded me of that terrible Blumhouse movie, Truth or Dare, that came out a couple years ago, where they get that stupid smile. And so I was like, oh, I don't know about this. But yeah, hearing that the test screenings were very high made me go, oh, well, maybe there's more than, again, I'm not expecting Barbarian level, but maybe there's just more than what they're pitching here. So
I sure hope so. Yeah, I sure hope so. Because, I remember I talked, my friend I went to see Barbarian with, I turned to him, because we had seen this trailer like a million times at this point. I was just like, do you think there's just like any chance at all that this movie is going to be any good? And he's like, oh, absolutely not. I'm like, yeah, I mean, that's how I'm feeling right now. But, I'm obviously, similar to Barbarian, even though I had some expectations, I'm really hoping for another horror surprise. I'm always welcoming it. And, maybe that's not an opening weekend movie for me, but if the reviews are good, I'll definitely be encouraged to seek it out. So
let's put it this way: as far as Paramount or destined for Paramount Plus release movies are concerned, I thought there was no way Orphan First Kill was going to be good, and I actually quite enjoyed it. So
I'm hearing that's good. Yeah, I haven't seen that one yet either, but I think I might add that to my October lineup just based on these early reviews. I'm very excited. I mean, it's that guy that made The Devil Inside that directed that, so
believe me, I'm shocked. I'm just as shocked as you that I liked the movie. I will. That's another one I'll say. Just go in cold. But right. I was. And he did like the Boy movies as well, I think. Yeah. So like I was like, there's no way this will be even work at all. And yet I found myself mostly entertained by it. So make of that what you will.
Well, I mean, with that, maybe hopefully this second half of 2022 is going to have an abundance of riches in the horror genre. But at the very least, we have Barbarian, and as you mentioned, Orphan First Kill, and hopefully Smile to look forward to at least. Maybe Halloween ends.
Halloween ends, yeah. Will Evil die tonight? We'll see. We'll finally see.
I don't know. We'll see. Yes, indeed. Let's play a Rotten Tomatoes game. So we have 105 reviews at the moment, more than I anticipated. But also, like you said, this is the one major wide release of the film, or wide release of the weekend. I mean, you said you already have a rough idea, I think, of what the score is. But I want to hear from you. What's your guess for what Barbarian has on Rotten Tomatoes at the moment?
It strikes me as I'm going to say 89.
89? You're very close. It is 92%.
Whoa, okay. Not too far off.
Yeah, I mean, well, look at it this way. I mean, Miss March has a 5% on Rotten Tomatoes. So, Zachary Cregger's,
he's almost got 100%.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, you combine the two scores. But, I mean, I can't think of many other directors that have gone from a single digits first film to a nearly 100% second film. That's just an undeniable feat.
Yeah, no, kudos. He's all the praise is warranted. I mean, I think that's fair to say. I think all the praise is certainly warranted for this movie. And I hope it sticks around. I hope people go check it out for sure, because it's it's and see it. Try and see it and I know people have opinions on when to go and how comfortable or uncomfortable they are with a crowd of people, but try to go to a Friday or Saturday night showing of this movie. I think where it would potentially have the most people. I think this movie warrants being in a crowd with and sitting along with their reactions to what exactly is happening in the movie. I think is 100% worth it.
I'd agree. Yeah, the only thing I'm going to say about that is just that I am very curious to see how this movie holds up on a second viewing. I'm very curious to know if it's better or worse, just because it is very based on the surprises of it. I think it's going to be better, or at least as good, just because I think it's going to add to the commentary and make me feel like it's a more enriching experience. I'm very curious to watch the first 20 minutes again, knowing what we know about the characters and how that paints my perception of what's happening. But let's talk about the audience score. Do you have any idea what that might be for this film?
Is that the Cinema Score, or is this on Rotten Tomatoes?
No, if you want to guess Cinema Score first, by all means, I have that pulled up as well.
Okay, well, I know what the Cinema Score is, so it's okay. C+, I believe,
which is lower than I anticipated. I thought this would be a B or a B+.
That's what I thought too, but then again, I don't know. Horror's so weird too, where people it's weird because like people are really, because cinema score, right, is really just how well did you market the movie to your target audience is mostly its biggest indication. And I'm like, there's a part of me where I'm like, I don't know what people wanted. Like the trailer gave like nothing away from the movie. Like, so I don't know, maybe people just thought it was going to be a chamber piece in the house, and maybe when it flips to the Justin Long stuff, they were like, wait, what the hell movie am I watching? So I don't know, but I would have definitely thought at least a B for sure.
Right. Or at least a B minus. I mean, I'd have to assume it is somewhat related to, like you said, like I think they felt like they were sold maybe a false bill of goods because like they disposed of Bill Skarsgård's character so early, and it becomes like this weird thing with this mutated incest daughter. And like there's this like, like this stuff about this weird guy from Detroit and this canceled actor. And like, I could see roughly, like if I had to logically figure it out, like I'm assuming that's the reason, but then again, applying logic to cinema score is a fool's errand. So
true.
That's all I'll say about that this week.
And then audience score on Rotten Tomatoes. If I had to guess, I'm going to say 72. 72.
Oh, wow. You are quite good this game. I was going to say you're quite good this game because you're very, very close. It's 73%.
Oh, my goodness. I didn't realize it'd be that close. Yeah, I guess I don't like. There's no math to it. It's more just cinema. Like C plus would be like what 50 would translate to a 58. Rotten Tomatoes users are a little bit more savvy, I guess, for lack of a better term, than probably like just your general Friday night polling. So I don't know. It's in that C grade, I guess, seemed like, or I guess 73 would be I don't know. Either way, it seemed right. It seemed right. That's all I'll say.
Yeah. Well, absolutely. And just to wrap it up, did you want to guess the Letterboxd average rating score?
I'm sure, might as well. I'm gonna say 3.26.
Oof. You were on a good streak, but you got a little too low with this one. It's actually 3.9 at the moment, which is higher. I guess I should have known.
Yeah, I guess I should have known though, because even more savvier than our Rotten Tomatoes users would probably be Letterboxd users. So that makes sense. Yeah. Done goofed, but that's okay.
I don't know. I mean, I would have probably guessed around this. Like, I would have guessed probably like 3.4 or 3.5. Definitely 3.9 is higher than I anticipate, but in a good way. I mean, I have been seeing a lot of like 4 out of 5 on my Letterboxd as far as like, people I follow, like their scores. A couple 4.5s. I haven't seen too many people below 3 out of 5, which is a good sign. But I don't know if that's the same for your timeline on Letterboxd at the moment.
It's pretty similar. I haven't seen really any lower, and I've even seen people who are, not as the biggest horror fans of the world be like, oh, wow, I really liked that. So that says something for sure.
Absolutely. And that's our mini bonus episode review. Not so many, I guess almost an hour long discussion, but I think certainly well warranted for what I think is a quite delightful surprise. And I hope this trend continues for September, like this weekend, the second weekend of September. Just put out the weirdest, goofy horror movie you want, but put it in theaters, I'd say. Whatever studio you may be. Yeah.
Do it. Yeah,
Ryan, thank you so much. Yeah.
Oh, sorry to be
Ryan, thank you so much. No, you're good. Yeah. I was just about to say, Ryan, thank you so much for joining me again. It's been a great pleasure to have you back on the show. I hope to have you on. I'm always happy to talk horror movies, but I'd love to actually talk about like something non-horror related too, because I know I don't want to put you like in a box as far as like genres are concerned. But certainly we'll have you on the show again, and I look forward to that time to come.
Oh, I appreciate it. No, thank you for having me. It's always an honor coming on Cinemaholics, and thank you for having me. And maybe we will do a different horror movie. Maybe we'll do like a rom-com. We'll do like a total 180 or something.
Yeah. If there's something just totally different that comes to mind, just reach out and we'll find a way to get you on as a guest. Something that completely subverts listener expectations. I'm definitely for that. It'd be very fitting for the films that we've just been talking about. So I would like to honor that trend in the future.
Yeah, I'm all for subverting expectations.
Yeah. All right. Well, from the Internet, Pennsylvania, I'm Will Ashton.
And from Seattle, Washington, I'm Ryan Oliver.
All right. Goodbye, everybody.